Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Sunday the 11th of September. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is the Full Scottish. My apologies for our slightly delayed start this afternoon. It's a sombre and a historic day today with a sense of sorrow shared by many. It's clear that the late Queen loved Scotland very dearly. Indeed, she said that Scotland and her personal happiness were very closely intertwined. And today, of course, Scotland is being watched on TV screens around the world. There's a bifurcation perhaps in all of our lives today, the meaning of which and the impact of which we will only be able to fully understand in due course. Personally, I have the strong feeling that everything changes, and yet perhaps to some extent everything stays the same. This afternoon, we have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 200 of the illegal Russian war of aggression. Then I will introduce our two excellent guests, and then together we will reflect on the week's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Ukraine's counter-offensive in the northeast of the country has inflicted an extraordinary defeat on Moscow, prompting the Russian army to pull back thousands of troops after suffering a series of battlefield defeats. Ukraine appears to have regained control of the two key cities of Kupiansk and Izium after a major counter-offensive in the Kharkiv region in recent days, after wrong-footing Russian forces with a much publicised Ukrainian southern offensive to distract Russia from the real one being prepared in the Kharkiv region. Photos published by the Ukrainian security forces showed troops raising the national flag in Kupiansk, which is an important logistical hub for occupying Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, where rail lines linking Russia to eastern Ukraine converge, and which in the last months has supplied the Russian invasion forces in northeastern Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed the withdrawal of its troops from Izium, the major base for Moscow's forces in Kharkiv, claiming that they were being regrouped, so that the efforts could be stepped up in Donetsk. Retaking Izium is perhaps Ukraine's most significant success in pushing back the Russians since the beginning of the invasion. The Ukrainian flag has also been raised in the city of Balaklish, according to the Kharkiv regional governor. The UK Ministry of Defence said Russian forces were likely taken by surprise by the counter-offensive. The much publicised Ukrainian southern offensive was a disinformation campaign to distract Russia from the real one being prepared in Kharkiv, according to a statement by Taras Berezovets, a former national security advisor turned press officer to Ukraine's special forces. In a video address on Saturday, President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukrainian forces had liberated about 2,000 square kilometres of territory since the counter-offensive against Russia started earlier this month. A woman has been killed and at least 20 civilians injured in Russian shelling in the Kharkiv district, according to the regional governor. The UN said it has documented torture and ill treatment of prisoners of war held by Russian forces in Ukraine. It also said it had corroborated at least 5,767 civilian deaths, although added that the actual numbers are likely considerably higher. The Ukrainian military said a further 350 Russian soldiers have been killed, bringing the total number since the start of the invasion to 52,250. The military also said Russia is sending 1,300 Chechen fighters to the southern Kherson region. It comes as Western intelligence suggests that Russian forces in Kherson are coming under sustained pressure from Ukrainian attacks. And despite the gains made by Ukraine's armed services, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the war was entering a critical period, and he urged Ukraine's Western backers to keep up their support through what could be a very difficult winter. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this afternoon by two excellent guests. Sandra White was first a List MSP and then the constituency MSP for Glasgow Kelvin between 1999 and 2021. Her campaigns include against closures and downgrading at the Royal Hospital for Sick Children, York Hill, and the Queen Mother's Hospital. She's also campaigned against racism and for improved treatment of asylum seekers, including joining an occupation against dawn raids. Her other campaigns have included successful attempts to save the 784 Theatre Group and involvement in the Stop the War Coalition. Sandra, good afternoon. How are you keeping?
Good afternoon, Andrew. I'm keeping very well and looking forward to speaking with Simon, who I haven't seen for many years.
Well, it's lovely to see you this afternoon, Sandra. Thank you for joining us on the Full Scottish. And as Sandra says, we're also joined by Simon Pia. Simon has worked as a journalist for over 3 decades in newspapers and broadcasting, covering current affairs, politics, arts, and sport. He's written at least 4 books and has edited at least 3 more. He was the media advisor and communications director for the Labour Party at the Scottish Parliament for 4 years. He was a special advisor to Wendy Alexander and Ian Gray, and also worked with the offices of the then Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, Alistair Darling. Simon has also been teaching at Edinburgh's Napier University since 2012. Simon, good afternoon. How are you keeping?
Fine, fine. A few technological problems, but I'm a bit of a technophobe, and it's good to see Sandra again since they kicked me out of Holyrood. Not Sandra, but Labour kicked me out.
Thanks, Simon. Well, also to you, thank you very much for being able to join us this afternoon on the Full Scottish. Let's move to our first story now, if we can, because you've heard me reading out today's daily update from Ukraine with regard to the illegal Russian war of aggression. And it seems perhaps that in Ukraine that the Ukrainian armed forces are turning the tide on Russia's illegal invasion of the country. Ukraine appears perhaps to be better organized, better commanded, certainly better motivated, and now maybe even better equipped than Russia. So, Simon, firstly for you, what do you think victory in Ukraine for the Ukrainians might look like?
Well, I'll preface it first of all by saying the first casualty of war is the truth. And there's the other old adage about the fog of war. Now, this is very much a propaganda war. And unlike so many conflicts, there's been very little coverage from journalists at the front line. And I say that because I'm just wary about people jumping ahead of themselves and thinking that the war, this is a crucial turning point. Now, it is a big success, and I was looking across the internet, and I believe people in Russia are panicking about what has happened. And if Ukraine has captured Izium, that is pretty significant. But I'd be pretty wary because the Russians are piling people into the area. Now, there's a couple of narratives, this is a great success, it's the turning point. But I've seen another narrative popping up. But I think this is a bit far-fetched. But why I would only mention it, because like in Kherson, in the big offensive down in the south, there was a lot of hype. We heard so much about it in the media, and then it all really went quiet and it moved on. And if that was a dummy run to distract the Russians up in the north, it was very expensive. I mean, a lot of Ukrainian soldiers were hammered by Russian artillery. And this is why I say, I mean, although I say the great majority of people in Britain obviously are people think, that what Russia done is a brutal invasion, it is illegal, etc. I think people still deserve a standard of reporting that reflects the reality and what is actually happening, because Russia's main offensive is in the Donbass area, which is down to the south, where they're just grinding forward. Now, they have the south and the middle, and why I'm saying is because I think it is unlikely that they're going to be able to kick. If you're asking can Ukraine go forward, will they be able to kick Russia out of the Donbass? Now, the problem is that the Russians call this a special operation because they have about 180,000 troops involved in this. We don't see this effect. They have a huge amount of resources that they could still bring in to what they call the special operation, and they outpower the Ukrainian artillery. So I don't see that it will turn the war. It's obviously a propaganda success and a psychological success for the Ukrainians, and boosts their morale considerably. But the big danger is that you just get a stalemate, and it's almost like, in some ways, like trench warfare in the First World War, and they will just hammer the hell out of each other for God knows how long. And meanwhile, the people in that part of Ukraine are going to suffer terribly.
Thank you, Simon. That's a very good point. We're talking here about the military aspects of the campaign, perhaps, but as you rightly say, more than 1 million people have been displaced from their homes, and many thousands have been killed. And so the impact is much wider than simply with regard to the military aspects of what is happening. But Sandra, I was going to ask you. It's day 200 after today is the 200th day after the Russian invasion in February. When you heard the news of the invasion back in February, did you expect that we would be where we are today, with fighting, fierce fighting, continuing 200 days later?
I was under no illusion that it would last for quite a long time. I'm not an expert on these issues. There's many people who are more expert than I am, such as David Pratt, who is there at the moment, and I do, take on board what he says. But I didn't think it would last as long as 200 years, because obviously the motivation, as you had mentioned previously, Andrew, there is a great motivation with obviously the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian government as well. They have this great belief in themselves and in their country that they will win this war. But when you look at, you've got NATO, you've got the Western countries behind Ukraine who are supplying them with the weapons, then obviously the Ukrainian people feel they have the West on their side. But is the West actually doing enough? That's my question. It's not unheard of in history where the West will step in, and when it's unsuccessful, they will just step back out. So that's my fear for the future for Ukraine. What's going to happen eventually? I mean, Simon has given a really good picture of the various regions and what could happen in Donetsk in the south and the north, because obviously it's a vast area. And to me, the biggest mistake that was made was in 2014 when they took over Crimea and nothing was done. Did they just sit back, NATO and the rest of the West, thinking, well, we'll just leave it? And to me, that was the catalyst. Putin obviously felt very confident in that, and they thought, well, they're not going to bother now with Crimea, we can just carry on, and they won't give in. I mean, Simon's absolutely right. We're seeing media coverage, but having spoken to a number of people and more, know more about it than I do, we're not getting all of the media coverage. Ukraine has been very, very good at pushing out the technology of the media, putting out, various programmes, etc., etc. And we are picking that up. We're not really seeing what's happening from the Russian side of it. But my worry is what's going to happen when the winter comes. Is Ukraine going to be able to continue with this? Is what we're hearing and seeing true? I think that's a valid point for everybody to make. I generally hope it is true, because I visited Estonia on a number of occasions after Russia had came out, and I saw the bullet holes in the prisons where people had been tortured. So there's absolutely no doubt about that. This has happened, it will happen again. And you have these places, Estonia, Finland, etc., who are desperately worried that if this war doesn't stop and Ukraine doesn't win, will they be next on Russia's list? And I think that's what we should be looking at. I think it's, I really hope that it doesn't continue further and over the winter, but I very much doubt that Putin will take a step back. I very much doubt that. His whole being is there to create the Russian Empire again, and unfortunately, Ukraine is the first step. Will it continue? I think it probably will, and I really feel for the people who are suffering there, the carnage that's been left to the people and the cities and the countryside around it.
Absolutely. Sandra, thank you. Thank you both for your thoughts and reflections on the situation in Ukraine as we understand it today. We'll move on now, because in a week when Liz Truss was appointed Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and effectively was elected by 81,000 people who happened to be members of the Conservative, And then her appointment was approved by the late Queen, who then died 2 days later to be succeeded by King Charles III. Simon, I was wondering, what were your broad reflections on what we've seen in terms of what's understood to be democracy in action in the UK this week?
Well, with the Prime Minister, I mean, Britain is not the only country that functions like this, that the head of the government can leave and there won't be a general election. That's our unwritten constitutional setup that operates by precedent, etc., and tradition and special principles. And that's the case, and it was when Gordon Brown took over from Tony Blair. There wasn't the same criticism at the time there, bar for within the Labour Party, whether he should have gone for an election because he had a big 10-point lead at the time. But there wasn't out in the country as a whole a feeling that Brown didn't have a right to take over as Prime Minister. Today it's quite different because we live in such a very different landscape, the cost of living crisis that we're facing, the moral bankruptcy of the Conservative government, particularly in Scotland, and it seems to have been spreading throughout the rest of the UK. This attitude, I mean, the disgraceful behaviour of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, and of course the fact that it comes down to, as I said, 81,000 Conservative Party members, etc. But that is the way this country functions. We do not have a written constitution. I'm one of these people who, I mean, there are some bonuses. You can make arguments for having an unwritten constitution, but I believe that that Britain should have had a constitution a long time ago. Like the House of Lords is a classic example of an unelected chamber. And of course, that's more food for thought if an independent Scotland comes into being in, sooner rather than later. What sort of a constitution are we going to have? And I think more, I would say people in the independence movement, I would even suggest to the Scottish government, they should start punting out ideas about what a Scottish constitution would look like. And I think that would attract more people, more support possibly for the idea of independence.
That's a very good point, Simon. Last time I heard, there were 4 separate groups drafting proposed constitutions for an independent Scotland. But as you say, if the Scottish government started to focus a little more on it, it might be news and might be discussion that would play very well with voters in Scotland, certainly. Sandra, I was going to talk to you a little more specifically about the transfer of power from Johnson to Truss. I was interested to know, what are your thoughts on the politics that we've seen? To what extent has Liz Truss been installed by the European Reform Group, the ERG, and the hard right wing in the Tory party, and to what extent do you think is her hold on? Is she beholden to them? To what extent is her time in office governed and controlled by the hard right wing in the Tory party?
I think she's beholden to the people that she's given jobs to in the cabinet. She's beholden, Liz Truss is beholden to the people that gave her money for her campaign, and then they got contracts. And this is where I get really, really angry. And Simon's absolutely right about the Constitution. I've thought for a long, long time that Westminster is not democratic. If this was this type of, as I call, regime change, this is what they want. Basically, it's came all the way down from Margaret Thatcher. Down, down, down. This is the legacy of Margaret Thatcher, and also the legacy of not having a written constitution. So I have to get that point in. Simon's absolutely right. We need a written constitution, and basically the Scottish Government should be pushing that as well. But the group, basically, we the taxpayers pay for that. We now know who all contributes to it, MPs, etc., MSPs as well, lords, ladies. We pay their wages and they contribute to that group. And they're a right-wing group, as we all know. So I don't know so much if she's beholden to them, but they certainly, when they put in their ideas, they copy those ideas. Now, Boris Johnson was an absolute buffoon, and is an absolute buffoon. Liz Truss, I can't say if somebody's not bright or anything like that. That's not for me to say. But certainly her performances makes you think that she is just basically being told what to do and she's reenacting it from this group and also the people that have paid her to be so-called Prime Minister. And I think the real slap in the face is the fact that we've got 11 days where we can't do anything at all, politically or anything. Can't even watch a game of football. There's no football on. And yet, Liz Truss is now going to be traipsing around the country with the new king and his consort. If that's not political, can somebody tell me what it is? It's a dictatorship we have here at Westminster. And unless we resolve that for the whole of the UK, and obviously an independent Scotland will have a written constitution, and we, basically, we're citizens, not subjects. That's the first thing that should change. But this country, the UK, is a laughing stock of the rest of the world. And if this was some other country, the way it's carrying on, people would be saying, oh, well, certainly the West would be saying to these other countries, well, we'll need to step in and have a regime change, as they've done on numerous occasions and caused more havoc than actually was happening in these countries in the first place. So it's a laughing stock, it's undemocratic, and we have the Tory party, unfortunately, with this majority. Hopefully, if there is a general election, they will be put out and they won't have this huge majority. But to sit and see people telling folk that they have to buy a kettle to keep themselves warm, put tinfoil behind their radiators, well, they're making billions and billions of pounds off the backs of ordinary people. That's not democratic. And that's my rant for the day.
Oh, you're perfectly entitled to be ranting, Sandra, with what we're seeing on our screens and we're experiencing this week. Certainly, your point about the Prime Minister accompanying the King and the Queen consort it strikes me that Liz Truss will be in Scotland more times this week than she's been probably since she left Paisley as a girl. But Simon, I was going to ask you briefly, and we know that the Conservative Party, that Truss's government, has a large majority in the House of Commons. But I was also, it struck me this week that there's not a great deal of this Parliament left. This Parliament must end in about 800 days' time. So do you think, is that going to be a limit on her ability to do pretty much anything?
Well, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Uh, a prime minister or first minister. It's up to them how much they do their. It's how much they let their hands be tied. Now she's got to do something about the cost of living crisis, and we saw. I don't know if we're going to be discussing that in a few minutes, but
We will.
really, no, she could easily start doing quite a lot of things. I'm a bit worried about that. I would prefer her not to act like that because often they speak about governments, if you look in the past, what they do, their most effective stuff is done in their first few months. People often speak about your first 100 days, and they tend to get bogged down in all sorts of problems. So you should go into office, ideally speaking, with a few key issues that you are going to solve or you're going to take decisive action on. Truss hasn't come in with that at all. The Tory parties are pretty clueless. They're floundering about. The most striking thing about Truss is her ambition. She obviously is an extremely driven person. And the point that both you and Sandra were making, she's been pushed in by the hard right of the Conservative Party. She'll take the party even more to the right than Boris Johnson, which I think is something that we have to fear. So ideally speaking, I want her to be pretty ineffective and bogged down and not be able to do much. We've already seen cost of living £2,500, because of the energy bill. That's £150 billion going to the energy companies. And once again, it's the British government. It takes me back to the financial crisis. They bailed out the banks, and in the long run, the taxpayer paid for it. So it's the classic socialism for the rich. It's not so much the rich. just as a global corporate elite, and we pay for it. And I think, you know, that the Labour Party, this SNP, and the Lib Dems have got to keep hammering away at that in the House of Commons, making that point. This is just, it's a repeat of what's gone before.
Absolutely, Simon. Thank you. But both you and Sandra have mentioned the cost of living crisis, and in particular the issues that we are all facing with regard to the cost of energy. And of course, the news of the Queen being unwell broke on Thursday during Liz Truss's statement in the House of Commons on her approach to the energy price crisis that we're all facing. However, with the announcement of the passing of the Queen on Thursday afternoon, pretty much all political scrutiny has stopped. However, more people are in poverty and businesses are still wondering how they can possibly pay their bills next month and through the winter. Now, Business for Scotland has postponed its annual dinner next week. The TUC postponed its annual conference that was set to take place today. But that decision has been questioned by some in the union movement who believe that there is now an urgent need for the TUC to meet and others because of the cost of living issues biting. One official in the TUC said, respect is right, but people won't stop being poor for the next 12 days. So, Sandra, is that official right when they say people are not going to stop being poor simply because there's a period of national mourning?
Well, that was the point I was trying to make when I mentioned about the 11 days of mourning. Now, there's no government at all. There's no legislation going through, apart from sneaking in about the DWP and people on credit will not get this monies to help them with their electricity bills. All of that sleight of hand is going on at the moment, and we're not finding out exactly what's what in that respect. But, you know, for a whole country to close down when we're in the middle of this huge crisis, when people are terrified. I mean, I visited a friend, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me mentioning it. Unfortunately, she's bedbound. And she was talking about to get the bed bath, etc. She would just be boiling a kettle. Now, that's ridiculous when somebody's ill and they're thinking, I'll just get a kettle boiled and that can do me rather than putting an immerser on. That's how desperate it is, people out there. And they're sitting there in limbo now, not knowing what's going to happen. Is this going to go ahead? And Simon quite rightly mentioned the 150, let's remember, billion pounds of borrowing, which basically we, the taxpayers, are going to have to pay back. But when you think to bail out the energy companies in June, I think it was about 28 energy companies were bailed out, it cost 2.7 billion. We've already paid that to them, and yet to renationalise them, it would only cost 2.8 billion pounds. I mean, where is the sense in all of this? And the only people that are getting rich are the folk with the shares and the conglomerates. And that's what the Tory party is all about. They don't care about folk. I mean, you talk to the small businesses, and there's lots of small businesses, we all know. We kept hearing constantly from Maggie Thatcher, from Boris Johnson, from the rest of them, they're the backbone of the country. They're absolutely collapsing. They can't afford thousands of pounds. And if they don't do something and they're not getting the same monies or time as apparently we're supposed to be getting, they'll just collapse or close down. People won't be able to keep their businesses going. So to stop anything happening in any government, Scottish Parliament as well, and to stop, the TUC is absolutely right, the spokesperson, we should be out in the streets. I just can't understand why we're not out in the streets campaigning, particularly at this particular time. Yes, you know, the Queen has passed away, but this happens to everybody at a certain time. 96 years of age, she gave a great service to her country, but this country's fallen to bits and the people are suffering. It's time we got out in the streets and demanded that this government brings the energy companies back into national, control.
Thank you, Sandra. And Simon, I was going to talk to you a little bit, thinking about your time as a media advisor in politics in Scotland in particular, because the timing and the tone of restarting day-to-day politics looks like it's being considered very carefully. Of course, it's difficult, and perhaps none of the parties want to make the first move. But I suppose with Parliament not sitting at the moment, none of the Parliament's sitting at the moment, the date of the funeral perhaps will be the watershed date. And I think there's an argument that it certainly shouldn't be longer than that, and also that political party conferences shouldn't be cancelled, because there are lots of difficult judgments to be made at the moment, and we have to get on with looking after people and people's lives. So, Simon, how do you think does the period of national mourning collide with everything that Truss has promised to do with regard to addressing the cost of energy crisis?
Well, I think it suits her, I mean, and the point you were making earlier about she's going to be going round with the new king round the country, she will be exploiting that to the hilt. And there's a protocol when the monarch visits anywhere, and what a government minister, whether the prime minister or the health secretary or whoever, or even an MP, how they behave, and they keep it very much in the background. Now we can be assured that what's her name, Liz Truss, will be bringing in on every photo opportunity available, and it keeps her away from the hard issues, the hard choices and decisions she has to make. So she will relish this to a certain extent. I'll give her a very high profile. I see she's already ahead in polls as who would be a better prime minister, her or Keir Starmer. So, but I think your point, Andrew, is exactly right. I think September the 19th, I think the way that the situation is at the moment, that it's going to stay like that until that Monday. But I think after that, things should get back to business. And I think in general, the public at large, of course, we see the cameras down at the mall, etc. I mean, the Queen was 96, 97 or whatever. I think there's been it's not a tragedy in the same extent as other public deaths like Diana's, for instance. But there is a limit. And I mean, I asked my students the other day what they thought of it. And this actually on Friday, and every single one of them, this is a large class, they all thought it was way over the top. Now that younger generation isn't really interested in the monarchy or supportive of the monarchy, but everyone took on board the need for respect, the need for due consideration. But you even saw the fact that football got cancelled, but rugby and cricket went ahead, which I think says something maybe about the confidence of the class system. But the coverage by the media, I think, is a reflection of the power of the British state. The Queen is the head of the British state. Its power and determination to assert itself and coerce. I'm not saying this is in a bad way, meaning that word in a negative sense, but to coerce people behind a national mood. I think, though, there is a disconnect between the media coverage and how the public in general feels about this. Everyone considers there should be due and proper respect. She was quite a remarkable woman. The way for 70 years she held that post as the head of state. I mean, I'm a Republican, maybe I guess you two might be as well, but I'm not wanting to put you on the spot. But you cannot say when it comes to being a head of state, when it comes to being, she did an excellent job in that. She basically didn't say anything. She kept out of politics. But that isn't quite true. The fact that the monarchy is a form of politics, it bolsters and perpetuates hierarchy, class inequality, the class system in this country, and innate conservatism, etc., sort of benevolent paternalism. This is a power structure. It's been like this for hundreds of years, and long may it continue.
Thank you, Simon. There's some very good points there, and actually, that segues very nicely into the next topic that I wanted to talk to both of you about, because that's the it was to reflect really on the coverage of events that we've seen in the media this week. For most of my life, the print media has treated the monarchy as an extension of EastEnders or the Coronation Street. So, Sandra, firstly with you, in the UK, do we have a problem with a courtier press that is owned and controlled by a handful of billionaires?
Absolutely, I think that is the big problem. You saw it just yesterday when there was a demonstration about the young black man that was shot, and Sky was covering it, and they put across there saying that this was people going to the Mall to Westminster to lay flowers, and they had to come back and say, "Oh, sorry, we made a mistake." When people complained about it, and we all know who runs and owns Sky News. The media in this country has been diabolical, not just about the royal family, but as it's been on, controlled by Murdoch, etc., etc. I mean, you look at some of this stuff, and I'll name it, the Daily Mail in particular, the Express. It's absolutely so cruel. Supportive of the Tories, the Telegraph's another one, and they just don't seem to care. They put out absolute lies, untruths, lies, whatever you want to call it, and they are actually running the mood of the country at times. When you looked at during the Brexit campaign, when would you have had people like Steve Bannon and Farage and all these people who were so right wing appearing on the TV, on BBC, multiple occasions compared to other people? And that has been a big problem in this country since Brexit and possibly before, but it's got worse. And the media really needs to have a good look at itself, or the public has to have a good look at, because they're not being educated the way we were before. When you read a newspaper, you could make up your mind. You know, they put forward the news. It's just not like that anymore at all. To me, the media really needs to get a grip. I've got some good journalists, but unfortunately, the vast majority, no. It's just been run by these media moguls, as you might call it. And we mentioned the royal family and the media as well. They don't call the royal family the firm for nothing. And they haven't been in place as long as they've been in if they've not been very clever at how they manipulate the news, the media, all to their own advantage.
Thanks, Sandra. And Simon, turning to you, firstly, thank you for using the word "bringing" on a Sunday afternoon. That cheered me up no end. But secondly, we had 8 weeks of what felt to me like wall-to-wall Tory coverage of the car crash of the Titans that saw Liz Truss appointed Prime Minister. And then we've got, certainly in broadcast media, we've got wall-to-wall 24/7 royal coverage for the next 10 days probably. And so I was thinking about the discussions, for example, you've been having with your students. What news is not being covered as the BBC and others focus firstly on the Tory election and then secondly on royal coverage? And how are young people in particular who are consumers of that media, how are they reacting?
Well, again, they think it is way over the top. Uh, I would say most young people don't really think about the monarchy. It doesn't. The Queen Elizabeth Windsor, like for us, you know, she has more significance. I mean, she came to the throne before I was born. We've all lived with her throughout our whole lives. But for them, you know, it's quite. I'm seeing about people who are 18 and into 18 to 30 age group. The Queen, because she's been less of a high profile these days in recent times, naturally enough. Uh, she is not of much significance. And I think it is an epical turning point that from when she came to the throne in the early 50s, there still was an empire, and she was that link with a Britain that used to be. And that idea of a Britain that used to be, that is past, that is gone forever, but there's still the tradition and heritage, etc. We saw that in Brexit, you know, this notion of what Britain is. But Britain is a very different country from when the Queen came to the throne. But the way that the Daily Mail, for instance, would cover it, it would say that as though we were still living in 1952, 1953, etc. That's their mentality, that are their values. It doesn't reflect the country that is today. Now, again, everyone, there is this is a thing I think that you get in the media that I think there's a dangerous tendency these days, a sort of a group think. You know, there's a group, you know, for instance, if you don't wear a poppy, you get lambasted, etc. If you go on the media without one. This week, the football pundit Trevor Sinclair, he put a tweet that not every black and brown people would not mourn or not mourn in the same way. Like Talksport dumped him immediately while they're having an investigation. He put out a tweet in his apology. But meanwhile, I saw in the Daily Mail two black academics getting hammered because I mean, one of them said about we were dancing on the Queen's grave. Maybe the language was wrong. And I think you should always show a certain restraint and decency and respect to people when anyone has died. I mean, even I disagreed with people being jubilant. I thought it was really bad taste when Margaret Thatcher died. But the point is that people should be recognising it is important. Black and brown people in Britain do not have that same feeling about the country and what the Queen represented. That should be acknowledged. It's wrong to stick our heads in the sand and pretend that everything's hunky-dory. And I thought that was very interesting. But the way that the media turned on Trevor Sinclair and these two black women academics is quite remarkable. And I mean, personally, I would say to somebody like Trevor Sinclair and these two women that they should have held back, maybe possibly at the moment. These matters can be expressed later. But are we in a country when you get attacked if you do not just follow the government, the state line?
Yep.
That's a very good point, Simon. Thank you. And Sandra, coming back to you, thinking about the sort of broadcast media in particular we've been experiencing over the last few weeks and are going to continue to experience for the next few days, do you think, are folks comforted and reassured by the sort of rolling, endless talking heads and reportage that we're treated to nowadays? Or instead, is it a complete turn-off for people?
I can assure you, the people that I've met and spoke to, not all independent supporters, by the way, it's a complete turn-off. People are absolutely sick of it. You could have, you know, a couple of days, etc. But if you put it on the TV, every single channel has the same thing. And people are absolutely scunnered and fed up with it. And if we're going to talk about Scottish independence, which I love to talk about Scottish independence, and a republic, that will push more people towards that, because people are sick to death. It's overkill. And when Liz Truss starts wandering about the four corners of the UK with the King, I think that will be even more so, particularly in Scotland and in Wales, because it's archaic, isn't it, Simon? When you think about the fact that whoever, just because you were born on that side of the bed or whatever, all of a sudden now you're the Prince of Wales, when it was Edward, you know, the first that actually done that, so that they could say, well, look, we're the overlords of Wales now. How do you think the Welsh people feel about that? All of a sudden, they don't get a vote on it. They're just told, right, on you go, the same as we are. So I think it'll push more people into thinking. And the one thing I will say, which I think has been quite good that's come out, not of the Queen passing away or anything like that, Brexit, it's actually opened up a lot of windows for people to see exactly how this country is governed so undemocratically. And I'm hoping that will push it forward again.
That's a very good point, Sandra. Thank you. Certainly, I think the actor Michael Sheen has been quite vocal over the last few days about the fact that the Prince of Wales is not Welsh. And so it's certainly something that, as you say, people have been prompted to reflect and perhaps consider and think about the manner in which we are governed in the current United Kingdom. But I'd like to move on to our final item this afternoon, if I may, because as usual in Broadcasting Scotland, time is against us. And the last item for this afternoon is that the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Browne, has said that he will call for a referendum in that country on becoming a republic within the next 3 years, following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Mr. Brown signed a document confirming Charles III's status as the new head of state of the Caribbean nation, but minutes later said he would push for a republic referendum. Now, the Caribbean nation is one of 14 nations to retain the British monarch as their current head of state. And Mr. Brown told ITV, this is not an act of hostility or any difference between Antigua and Barbuda and the monarchy, but it is the final step to complete that circle of independence, to ensure that we are a truly sovereign nation. So, firstly, Simon, thinking first about Antigua and Barbuda and the wider implications there, as Antigua announces plans to be the next nation to hold a referendum on becoming a republic, what do you think is the future for the wider Commonwealth?
Well, I think it was Barbados on New Year's Day. I think they took that move as well. So I mean, it's growing. It's definitely growing among. I think you could expect within the next few years, virtually all the Commonwealth countries to move in that direction, bar for New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, probably because they are predominantly white nations. Although I mean, Australia is a very different ethnic mix, you could call it, from what it was even 30, 40, 50 years ago. I mean, there's a lot more Southern Europeans, people of that origin, and also Southeast Asians in Australia. So they do not. So it'd be interesting to see how Australia moves. But I think just if I could go back to Sandra's point about Scotland and Wales, regarding the Queen and the royal family, this shows again there is a different sentiment in Scotland. There is not hostile. I mean, you'll always get stupid people who are a bit ignorant. It lacks any class to make, disrespectful comments about the death of a monarch. But there is a definite difference from, even if 50 years ago in Scotland there would be a very different response to what it is today. And it's not hostility, but there is a very distinct difference between that England and Scotland, and I think also Wales and England as well. I tell you another thing, a point that was missed out, why the football was cancelled. At the Hearts game on Thursday night, there was booing during the minute silence. Now, I don't know if you were aware why. Now, that would have, in many ways, that would have got far bigger media coverage, but they wanted to play it down to a certain degree. Now, that surprised me. I did not expect that. And if you know the workings of Scottish football, I might expect that more at certain other clubs, but not at Hearts. But that just shows you. And you know why that is? And I understand the Edinburgh football fan makeup very well, because there are a lot of people who are Hearts supporters support independence. It's that former group of the heartland of the Scottish Labour support right across the Central Belt that has gone towards the SNP and supports independence now. And they're obviously young guys, and that football fans always misbehave to a certain, or can be relied on to misbehave to a certain extent, or not be held to, the convention. And they booed, and it was wrong. It's wrong of them to boo, but and I think if there'd been other grounds today, I tell you, I'm quite happy to say this, and I'm not anti-Celtic at all, but I bet you there would have been booing at Celtic Park. Possibly, I'm a Hibs supporter. I'm sure a lot of Hibs fans, I know a lot of Hibs fans might have reacted in that way as well, and throughout other clubs. Probably the only club is Rangers at Ibrox. They would not, that would be because they are, as we all know about the sociology of Scottish football, etc. But I think there is a big, and this isn't being recognised, and our papers aren't recognising that enough, like the Scotsman, the Herald, the Daily Record, etc. It's the job of journalists not to just run with the authority line, not run with the official line. The job of journalists, and as I was saying, I was telling my students, you are there to ask questions and report on behalf of the people, the public at large, the citizen.
Absolutely.
Very good point, Simon. Thank you. Well, very, very well made. And certainly, I caught myself, the last time I was in Celtic Park was during the Commonwealth Games, and I caught myself thinking, this is unusual seeing the Queen in Celtic Park as the Red Arrows flew over the top of the stadium. So yes, a different response in different stadiums across the country. But Sandra, I've got the final question is one for you. And again, thinking of the changes that are being signalled, perhaps in the Caribbean, perhaps in Australia, where the current Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is definitely a Republican. Uh, Bringing that all back and thinking about it in the UK and in Scotland, Sandra, how forcefully do you think that the various powers that be, the various those who have power in the UK at the moment, how forcefully do you think that they will fight to retain power and will fight to, or will work to make sure that power remains where it currently is in their hands?
Very forcefully. I mentioned the firm earlier on, over 300 years, particularly in Scotland. They will not give that up easily. We now have this huge big Scottish office building, which they officially opened, Alistair Jack, here's another one, who officially opened that. Supposedly thousands of civil servants going to be in it. I passed it every day when I was working and obviously was an elected member, hardly ever saw anybody about the place. That is them making their mark, basically, to keep Scotland under the thumb. And they will be working very, very hard, they have been working very hard for the past number of years, and particularly more so now, to basically stop the movement of independence going forward. I personally believe that we should be, I know we have started, we do have groups looking at various aspects of it, but Simon mentioned earlier about the Constitution. There is 4 groups doing that, but these things should be publicised more. We need to get off the back foot here in Scotland for all, not just SNP or the Scottish Government, the Yes movement in general, which encompasses people of politics and none. We need to get off the back foot and start motivating and moving, because they have already done that and they will do everything in their power, everything, to ensure that they have a stranglehold on us. They're after, well, I've already got most of our energy. How is it that we produce all this energy in Scotland and we've got to pay to get it onto the national grid, and then we have to pay more money while we produce it and send it down south? It's an absolute disgrace. And the next thing they'll be after is our water. So they're not going to let us go. We will need to make sure that we have every I dotted and every T crossed to make sure that we get independence. And that's why I say, come on, let's get motivated, get off the back foot, and let's push our message, which is a very good one, push our message for an independent Scotland, because there's no way we can survive if we're still linked to the UK. It's not an empire anymore, it's not a Great Britain, it's a laughing stock, and we need to get out.
Sandra, thank you. That you've summed up this afternoon's programme absolutely perfectly. Thank you, because that, I'm afraid, is all that we have time for this afternoon. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, then please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers, which will enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. I hope that you have enjoyed a tasty full Scottish this afternoon. I'd like to thank everyone who has been watching, and I'd like to say a very special thanks to our 2 excellent guests, Sandra White and Simon Pia. Thank you both, guys. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will be here again tomorrow with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. Meanwhile, I'm away to rewatch To Play the King with Ian Richardson, Michael Kitchen and Diane Fletcher. I hope that you have a very peaceful Sunday. Bye bye.